speaking with Jeff before we started today, and I said how he had the harder part of today's presentation because he's giving the spiritual thought, which implies you have to think. I'm giving the spiritual talk. We all know that talking doesn't necessarily have anything to do with thinking, so I'm sort of off the hook. I'm going to try to think a little bit about this. Talk about oneness. And you know, we say that a lot. We're all one, everything's one. But as I was thinking of it as this talk, I said, well, what in the heck does that mean? I mean, does that mean I take the milk out of the refrigerator and paint the house with it because milk and paint are both one? Do I eat the wood chips lying around because it's all one? What does it mean? And so as I thought about that, I thought, you know, let's take what evidence we can find and follow it through step by step and see where it takes us. Now, if any of you don't want to do that, I understand. You know, you could step into the break room, close your eyes, or cover your ears, because sometimes this leads us to new enlightened thoughts, and sometimes that path gets us lost. And sometimes we can't tell the difference when we get there. So let's see where we go. So where do we start? We're going to look at oneness. Well, one of the things you've heard me say many times is that if we just start logically, if we say we truly believe there is one divine spirit, that it's all God, then there can only be one principle that guides all things. Now, if we just take that as our starting place, then we're saying there can't be, one principle that maybe is the best one, but there's other guiding principles to life. There must be just one that guides everything. There are, of course, people who believe that there are spiritual principles that guide the spiritual life, but that physical life is totally different. But that's not oneness. So if there's oneness, then spiritual principles and physical principles must be the same. Now, it's difficult sometimes to start from scratch and figure out spiritual principles. So let's go the other way. Let's start with what we can see, what we can measure, the physical principles. And even though I think this is a brilliant thought of mine, I think there is somebody who thought of this earlier, the master spiritual teacher, Jesus. When his disciples asked him, how do we pray? Among the things he said, speaking of our Father in heaven, speaking of God, the guiding principle, he says, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Now, people often interpret that as some sort of plea, let's all follow God's will here. But if we realize the enlightenment of Jesus, then we realize he's not pleading for something. He's making a statement about reality. Thy will, divine order, shall be done. It is done on earth in the physical plane as it is in heaven, in the spiritual plane. There is one principle guiding it all. So let's look at that then. Let's look at this physical part. We see all of the differences, but we know other things now, right? And again, you've all heard me talk about that. The Greeks used to think that reality, physical reality, was earth, fire, water, and air. And then later, the ether that made up the physical reality of the heavens. And then one of them, Democritus, I think was his name, he had to be feel sorry for those Greeks because their parents gave them funny names all the time. But anyway, he came up with the idea that all physical things could be chopped up. They could be split into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, but everything would have one piece that you couldn't get any smaller than, and he named that the atom, coming from a Greek word that means not capable of being cut up. Now, from there, obviously, we've moved on, and when they discovered atoms, they got too excited and named them right away as something that couldn't be chopped up, but of course they can be, and we know that all atoms are made of protons and neutrons and electrons, and that protons and neutrons are made of quarks. You all are familiar with this, of course, and that quarks and electrons actually can be seen as energy as well. And therefore, all physical matter, as Einstein told us, is also energy. And through extensive, both mathematical formulas and experiments, they have determined that all forms of energy are actually one, except for gravity. That's outside of that. But all of the top physicists project that we will find out eventually that gravity is also part of that one energy. And so we know that all things are in reality one energy, that's the base of everything. So can we just say that physical reality, the base is all things are one? And yet, I think there's more to it than that. Because that one energy in different conditions shows itself differently, it combines with things, and it makes all of these separate, diverse things. Now, often we're told that's not reality, that's illusion. You know, that there's only oneness, and if you just close your eyes and think about it, then suddenly everything is oneness to you, and the rest is illusion. Well, I think as a spiritual group, family that developed from religious science, we need to think of this. If it's science, if it's spiritual science, religious science, we should be able to test it. So if you want to test, the diversity of what we see around us is real, go take your head and bump it against one of these walls. I've done that a few times myself. They appear to be totally real. If you ram your head against that wall, I think you'll rethink the idea that it's not reality. And so what do we have? I mean, we would like for God to have said, I'm going to make this real simple for all of you. But apparently, it's a little more complicated. And so physically, all things are one. And that oneness is real. I mean, that's totally real. It's the foundation for everything. All of the interactions we see, all of the differentiation comes from that. It's based on that. And yet, the differences themselves are real as well. And so physical reality, the ultimate reality of it is, it's all one and it's all separate. So what does that tell us about spiritual reality? I warned you we could get lost on this trail if we're not careful.
Some of us are.
So, but we're going to come out of the woods with any luck. So let's look at what that has told us then, what that tells us about spiritual reality. So we said the basis of all of physical reality is that we're all one. And the basis of spiritual reality is we're all one. But that oneness combines and makes other things. And we have individual immortal souls. Separate individual immortal souls. Now, as oneness and separation are both true, that's true here too. If we see our souls as separate, they are separate. That's reality. If we see them as merged with the one, they are merged with the one. This is the reality that exists in physical space. This is the reality that exists in spiritual space. That there is the oneness that's all of us, and there is a God that's separate that can be prayed to. We don't say that, I know. But can that be? Because if it's not, let's call Mother Teresa what she is, a fraud. Because she can't be a holy woman if she's praying to a God outside herself, and yet we say that cannot exist. So Mother Teresa, this great saintly woman, is a fraud, or at least she's delusional. She's out doing nice things, but she's a delusional woman. Or can it be that spiritual reality is such that oneness and separation can both exist? And that we can have that kind of separation and still realize that there's oneness to go to. Now, to demonstrate this and where it's going, I want to talk about something Angie talked about last time. And I want to start out by saying I'm not going to say that Angela was wrong. That would be like saying God's wrong. It's just not something you do. And if you say God's wrong, you may be struck by lightning. And if you say Pizzello's wrong, I've heard rumors of mafia people. You know. So let me just say I'm going to give a different perspective. So if you weren't here, he talked about how life is like a refrigerator. And we have all these good foods in there. But if we unplug it, then those things rot and they're wasted then. And I was thinking that and thinking, what happens when something rots? What happens is it's being eaten by bacteria, another form of life. When those things are in there and we say they're wasted and they're no good, they're being eaten by bacteria, which is benefiting another form of life. And so, is that really wasted? Is it wrong? And let me explain something else about this. We can unplug that refrigerator, but we cannot unplug ourselves. You can't do it. That plug is that refrigerator's connection to the source. We cannot be disconnected from the source. Now, we see spiritual things we do and we say that's when we're connected. And we see these other things and we say that's when we're not. But how can you not? How can there be oneness that's all things and yet say somehow you're outside of that oneness? No, the truth is that hate is God. And fear is God, and loneliness is God, because it's all one. Now this gets us really deep in the woods. Because now what we're saying is that there's this oneness that's real, and there's this separation that's real, and it's all just God. And I was a little scared when I got there. But we have to look, I think, for one more path. And that's the path of purpose. Now, Angie and I got to spend several